You know what John Cena's favorite spell is? Invisibility, because you can't see him. Welcome to the Geek Pantheon. I am Eric, and today we are going to be kind of layering a couple of things that I love. Obviously, tabletop role-playing games being the central theme of this channel, but also I enjoy wrestling. I enjoy watching professional wrestling from time to time and following it, and I think that there are some very compelling storytelling lessons that we can take from professional wrestling, because it is truly unlike any other media out there. When you think about it, you have performers going out live in front of crowds, performing complex choreography while needing to tell a story through that choreography. But it's not dancing, it's like stunt work that they're having to dive and put their bodies in danger. And then they also have to be able to pick up a microphone and talk in a compelling and interesting way and tell a story through that means. But you have a team of writers behind the scenes constructing all of it, but you have an audience right there interacting with the performers, unlike traditional stage theater where the audience sits quietly and laughs and applause. Like, you have audience members throwing trash at the performers when they're upset about it. So it's a very unique and interesting form of storytelling. And I think that there are some things that I have seen over the course of watching wrestling that I've taken away that I really love about how you can tell stories in that medium. And I think you can apply those to D&D. So I want to get into those and talk about how you can take these lessons and apply them to your game and make your stories maybe a little bit better. So let's get into it. Number one, plans can and should change based upon the reaction of your audience. So for those of you that don't watch professional wrestling, which if you don't, that's fine. Lots of people don't. I don't begrudge you that. It's neat and I enjoy it. Anyway, there was a guy named Daniel Bryan way back in 2014, I think, that the crowd really liked. He had been wrestling on the independent scene. The internet loved him, and he was in the big WWE system. And the crowd really wanted to see him be more than what he was. And so they started vocally expressing that through cheering and chanting and things like that. If you've ever seen somebody do a yes, yes, yes chant, that's a Daniel Bryan thing from this era. And it was very clear that the writers who had planned out the story, the Dungeon Master, had different plans. Drax the Destroyer from Guardians of the Galaxy had recently come back and won the Royal Rumble to get a chance at the title. But they booed him because they didn't want Drax the Destroyer. They wanted Daniel Bryan. And so basically it started this whole long drawn out story of the writers trying to convince the audience that no, you don't want Daniel Bryan. He's a small man, not big and beefy like Drax the Destroyer. And eventually the writers relented. They put Daniel Bryan in the main event of WrestleMania, their big event for the year, and he won, and everyone was happy. Spoilers for WrestleMania 30, I guess. But anyway, when we look at something like that, we can see an initial resistance and pushback. As a Dungeon Master, you have this story planned out. You have your campaign plotted, and here are the villains, and here are the good guys, and here's the neutral faction, and here's the good faction, and here's the evil faction, and they're all going to do this and this and this and this and this. But what happens when your players focus on something else? What if they see the evil faction as this really compelling and interesting thing, but you intend them to just be a throwaway thing partway through your campaign, that they're going to get cast aside? And you got this big bad evil planned for the campaign that you've been building towards, but your players don't care about that. They don't want that. They want the evil faction to be the big bad. What do? Well, you should change your plans. You should listen to, in wrestling terms, it's your audience. In D&D terms, it's your players. You should listen to the direction that they're pulling you in. What things do they seem to care about at the table? What things do they find compelling? And you can take what you already have planned, your big bad evil, and make him the leader of the evil faction, even if that wasn't originally the plan, because then you're incorporating the thing that you want to do in with the thing that they find interesting so that everybody gets to be happy. They get to interact with this compelling, interesting faction that you presented. You did a good job. they're happy with what you've done. A lot of DMs sometimes take this as a failure of their storytelling, that the players aren't focusing on what they want to focus on. And the thing to remember is you're presenting everything in terms of the story. It's just that maybe the session where you presented the evil faction, you were just having a great role-playing night. You were on. And so you presented the members of this faction in a really compelling and interesting way. And maybe when you introduced the lieutenants of the big bad evil, you'd had a rough day. Work ran long, or, you got a flat tire, or you were just hungry. And so you weren't on your best game that night. That's fine. You can take the good thing and the thing that they're not that compelled by, put them together like a Reese's peanut butter cup. And then everybody gets to be happy at the table. So that's point number one. Before we continue, if you are enjoying the video, be sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. It helps a whole heck of a lot. And also, we got a Discord if you want to join it. With link down below if you want to join the community and talk to other people about these videos or just about D&D or movies or food or whatever. And we have a Patreon, patreon.com/thegeekpantheon. Huge thank you to everybody that supports the channel. Stuff like this would not be possible without your financial support. So thank you. I appreciate it. Okay, so there was a wrestler, he's still going, named CM Punk. And a lot of people really love CM Punk. A lot of people really don't like CM Punk. But what I find compelling about him is he subscribes to a movement known as straight edge, where he does not consume drugs, alcohol, he keeps his body pure. And that is actually a thing that the person, Phil Brooks, that portrays CM Punk on the wrestling shows, does and lives by, due to family history and things like that. But he incorporated it into his character of CM Punk as well. So objectively, not drinking alcohol, not consuming drugs. Do you consume to take drugs? Anyway, those are things that I think from a health standpoint, most doctors would say is objectively good. Like CM Punk, through his character, encouraging others to live a straight edge lifestyle is something that we could consider good. Now, back in his early days of his career, and even he brings it back every now and then, he had a catchphrase that was, "My name is CM Punk, I'm straight edge, and I'm better than you." And that, is kind of a jerk way to put it. And you have had multiple instances over the course of his career where his belief in straight edge has been used as a catalyst for him as a villain, where you've had other wrestlers who, because wrestling oftentimes uses real life drama and trauma sometimes going on in the wrestlers' lives to inform the storylines, because, wrestling fans oftentimes are aware of these things. And so there was a wrestler named Jeff Hardy, is a wrestler, he's still going also, who had gotten a DUI and had some issues with alcohol. And so they put him in a feud with CM Punk, and CM Punk was talking about how much better he was than Jeff Hardy because he's straight edge and he would never do something as horrible as get behind the wheel of a car while intoxicated. But he was very mean and petty and a jerk about it, to the point where he would taunt Jeff with alcohol in the ring and things like that. So villains in general are far more compelling when they are right but jerks. And I talked about this a bit in my villain video. I'll try to remember to ding it up there. But villains are far more compelling when they're not just maniacal mustache twirling cartoons. They're much more compelling when they have a sense of purpose and a sense of honor, or this notion that they're the only ones that can do the right thing. And I think that is applicable even to your lower level villains, of having a villain that is right but a jerk about it. Having a paladin that follows a lawful good code but takes it too far, takes it to an extreme, is a much more compelling villain than just a fallen paladin that serves the Dark Lord and I want to see the lands bathed in blood. I mean, that's fun to kill and fight, but it's not compelling from a storytelling standpoint. So taking positive aspects of a character, when you're building your villain, build a person first. I guess that's the best way I could put it. Build a person, an entity, And, this, I mean, if you're dealing with like elder gods or like alien beings, then this kind of gets a little murky. But when you're creating a villain that you would consider a humanoid from the material plane that can have understandable agencies and things like that, then build a person first. Leave the villain stuff to the side. Build a compelling individual, and then pick what aspects of them you want to crank up to 11 to make them into a villain, to make them somebody that is detestable and frustrating and angering, because that is where a compelling villain comes from. Because it's very fun to root against somebody that you can go, look at him and go, yeah, you're right, but you're being a real dinghead about it. Like, if you just chill for a second, maybe that would be okay. And that brings me to point number 3. Your villains can become heroes, and your heroes can become villains. So for those of you that are not up on wrestling nomenclature, wrestling deals in faces and heels. Faces are the good guys. They're the ones that, come out and like get the crowd to cheer them and sell all the t-shirts and wah doo boo doo. And the heels are the bad guys. They're like CM Punk, who, take the weaknesses or the tribulations of their fellow wrestlers and turn it against them, or they will cheat or lie, bad guy stuff. They don't have that sense of honor of the sport and the competition and all that kind of stuff. But because wrestling deals with people's entire careers, you have some people that will wrestle for 30 or 40 years over the course of their entire career. Very few people stay one way or the other. Very few people are a face for their whole career. Very few people are a heel for their own career. They will switch based on audience reactions, because oftentimes if somebody is a good guy for too long, people will get sick of them and start to boo them, in which case then you turn them heel to feed off the boos. And then eventually oftentimes a bad guy will be so cool that people want to cheer them because they're so cool and they don't care what anybody thinks. They don't care about authority, and they're just going to do their own thing. And so then they become a face that can be cheered, but they still are, rebelling against the evil authorities and things like that. So a great example of this is Stone Cold Steve Austin was a big wrestler back in the 90s, and he went on that arc where he came in as a heel who didn't give a crap about anybody, was just out for himself. And you had another wrestler named Bret Hart, who was a very technically minded wrestler. His family was all about wrestling in real life. He literally grew up in wrestling. And so wrestling was so important to him. And that made him a face. People loved that he cared so much about the sport and the industry and things like that. Well, they had a match at a WrestleMania where Stone Cold had been around for a while. People started wanting to cheer him because he was so cool. And it was the 90s, so extreme. He's the rebel. And people got kind of sick of Bret's straight down the middle, like no cheating, all good wrestling shtick. Like they were more inclined to cheer for Austin. And so they had a match where Bret ended up winning because Austin passed out in a submission hold. But then Bret kept it locked in and held it. And it flipped both of them in one match where Bret became a villain because he was angry with the fans for turning on him because he had dedicated his life to them and providing them good wrestling and, sacrificed being on the road 300 days a year. And why would you start booing me for continuing to do my job the way you've always appreciated me doing it? A bad guy with a compelling reason to be mad. And they started cheering Austin in earnest because he was still that, I don't give a crap about anybody, but he had the resilience and he showed his fortitude. He wasn't going to cheat. He wasn't going to quit. He wasn't going to run away. He was going to stay in the fight until he literally could not stay in the fight any longer, which, yay. And so that lesson to me of you can have somebody in your campaign that is initially presented as an antagonist, as a villain, and you can find interesting, compelling ways to take aspects of them that may not be at the forefront, but you could eventually start pulling them out of them to make them into an ally to the party, or at least somebody that the party can appreciate and want to fight alongside, or at least see through and help them achieve their goals. So you could have, for example, if your campaign starts off in a singular city, and it's all the quests and all the stories are like faction and gang fighting and things like that, and you have a leader of a thieves guild that the party comes up against, and they're a real jerk to the party and like condescending, because presumably they're probably like level 5 or 6 when the party is level 1, and so they look down like, oh well, welcome to the city, and things like that. You can make them a jerk and make the party hate them and like fight against them, and like your factions are up against each other until a massive outside force shows up to attack the city. And then the party all of a sudden find themselves fighting alongside this jerk, and they realize that the only reason this person is so grating and condescending and territorial and all these things is because of how much they love the city. They love their home. They love the player character's home, if the player character's from the city. And they will do anything they can to protect it, which is why they've run up against the party so much. But now that there is a new threat that has emerged, now all of a sudden the party is fighting alongside them and potentially have gained a new level of respect for this character, because now they're seeing them through a different lens, through a different angle. And that can be really interesting. Additionally, you could have a heroic character, maybe a paladin. I'm dunking on paladins a lot in this video, that shows up and, it helps the party, assists them in a quest, comes to them in their time of need. And, as the party gets to know them better, they put them further and further up on the pedestal of like, oh, they believe in like justice and righteousness and protecting people, protecting others. And then you could have an instance happen where they take that notion too far, maybe, or there's further clarity given to the party where, the paladin protects people. But then they realize it's not all people. The paladin protects citizens of this nation, and they don't give a crap about the suffering of others from outside the nation. They're very nationalistic. Or, that could be classist, where, people under a certain income line, the paladin no longer cares about, or things you could do something like that. So just when you're fleshing out your villains and heroes and side characters, once again, make them people first, so that you have a roadmap of how you can tweak their personality to make them more heroic, more villainous, and where to crank things up. And then you can also switch it over time to have a compelling character that goes on an arc, and the party can feel like, oh, this person has grown or changed or something. You could have that paladin that's initially presented heroic, then the party learns more about them and they can become more villainous, but then that paladin goes on an arc and comes to realize how wrong they were, and now they're back around to heroic, and that can feel like a really dynamic NPC character that's fighting alongside your party. Anyway, what did you all think of that video? Did you click off as soon as I mentioned professional wrestling? In which case, you're not seeing this. So thank you all who stuck around. Even if you're not wrestling fans, I appreciate it. And let me know what you thought down below. Are there any lessons that you've taken from other media that you use as a storytelling device in your games? Let me know down below. Is there another media or art form that you would like me to do something similar to this with? Let me know down below. Comment down below. Be sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel. Thank you all so much for watching. I will see you next time.